The mysterious signal emerges. It was an ordinary day on Earth when the unexpected happened. A strange signal, unlike anything humanity had ever encountered before, cut through the vastness of space. It wasn't a simple message or an ordinary transmission. No, this was something different, something far more ominous. It was a cry from the depths of the unknown, and it reached Earth with an urgency that made people stop in their tracks. At first, no one knew what to make of it. The signal was weak, fragmented, and impossible to decode. Scientists from around the world scrambled to analyze it. They worked around the clock, poring over every piece of data, every scrap of information they could extract from the signal. Was it a message of peace from a distant alien race? Or was it something darker, something meant to lure them into a trap? The Earth's governments were just as baffled. The United Nations convened an emergency meeting, bringing together the world's most powerful leaders. The air was thick with uncertainty. In the midst of all this, a small group of researchers working at a space observatory in South America made a shocking discovery. They found that the signal wasn't just some random noise from space. It had a pattern. It was deliberate. It was a call for help. But who or what was calling? And why now? The researchers were cautious. They knew the dangers of jumping to conclusions, but the more they analyzed the signal, the more they were certain it wasn't from any known human civilization. It wasn't from a neighboring planet, and it didn't match any of the communication frequencies Earth had ever encountered. It was something new, something alien. As the signal continued to pulse across the stars, the world's leaders began to react. Governments issued statements, assuring the public that they were taking the matter seriously. But behind closed doors, there was fear. Fear that this mysterious signal might be a harbinger of something terrible. No one could be sure. At the same time, military forces across the globe went on high alert. Satellites were repositioned, and space defense systems were activated. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Days passed, and still, the signal persisted. It wasn't like any communication Earth had ever known. The pattern was too complex to be random, yet it was too strange to be anything Earth could fully comprehend. It felt ancient, the kind of message that had traveled through time, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. In the midst of this uncertainty, a decision was made. A team of scientists, engineers, and military experts was formed to investigate the source of the signal. The team was tasked with finding out where it had come from and, more importantly, what it meant. The project was named Operation Echo. The team worked tirelessly, using every available tool to trace the signal's origin. They didn't know what they were looking for, but they knew it had to be something important. They had to be ready for whatever might come next. As they analyzed the signal's trajectory, they discovered something disturbing. It wasn't coming from anywhere close. It was coming from a distant part of the galaxy, a place humanity had never explored. It was almost as if it had been traveling for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. But why Earth? Why now? The team's leader, Dr. Evan Pierce, a respected scientist and expert in extraterrestrial communication, stared at the data in disbelief. The signal was pointing directly to a system that had been abandoned for thousands of years. It was a system once inhabited by an ancient alien species that had vanished long ago, leaving nothing but ruins and empty worlds behind. Or so humanity thought. Pierce couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The signal wasn't just an ordinary call for help. It was a warning. The urgency in its tone couldn't be ignored. There was something out there, something humanity was not ready for. He gathered his team in the conference room. We're dealing with something far beyond us. This isn't just a message, it's a cry for help. But it's also a beacon, a signal to whoever, or whatever, is out there. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the risks. If this was truly a warning from an alien race, it meant that Earth was in danger. But if it was something else, something even more dangerous, humanity could be facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. The world was on the brink. People could feel it in the air. Something was coming, and the signal was only the beginning. For now, the fate of humanity lay in the hands of a small group of people. They had to find out what this signal meant, and they had to do it fast. Every moment that passed made the mystery deeper, and the fear of what lay ahead grew stronger. The signal had already changed the course of history. But what would happen when its true meaning was finally uncovered? As the days went on, the urgency grew, and so did the sense of impending doom. The question remained, was this a plea for help, or the first step in an invasion that could destroy everything humanity had ever known? The first encounter. The team working on Operation Echo had spent days analyzing the mysterious signal, but still, no clear answers had emerged. Every time they thought they had cracked the code, another layer of complexity would emerge. The urgency in the message was undeniable, but the content remained frustratingly vague. The signal kept repeating, but its meaning was still a mystery. Dr. Evan Pierce was restless. The more he thought about the ancient civilization that had once inhabited the distant galaxy, the more it nagged at him. If this signal was truly from that place, then why had it taken so long to reach Earth? And what was so urgent about it now? Then came the breakthrough. After days of intense calculations and careful examination, a key piece of the puzzle finally fell into place. The signal wasn't just a warning. It was a map. It was pointing directly to a system in the far reaches of the galaxy, a star system no one on Earth had ever visited. But what made the discovery even more terrifying was that the system had been known for its violent history, a place where an alien war had decimated entire civilizations. And now the signal was leading Earth's best minds straight into it. The decision was made almost immediately. A team would be dispatched to investigate the source of the signal. It wasn't just a scientific mission anymore. It was a race against time. Humanity had no idea what lay in the distant system, but the urgency of the signal couldn't be ignored. What if this was an enemy preparing to strike? What if they were already here, waiting for the right moment? The mission was given the code name Echo 1, and the team was carefully selected. It consisted of military personnel, scientists, engineers, and explorers. Everyone needed to ensure the mission's success. Dr. Pierce was among them, though he still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The journey would take months. The ship, Endurance, was outfitted with the latest technology and the best resources Earth had to offer. But no matter how advanced the ship was, there was one thing it couldn't protect them from: what they would find when they reached the source of the signal. As the team traveled through space, the silence was almost deafening. The crew was well-trained and focused, but the constant thought of what awaited them in the distant star system loomed over them like a dark cloud. Every time they looked at the data, they saw the same thing: a dangerous, hostile region of space, filled with ancient ruins and shattered worlds. What had happened here? What kind of force could destroy an entire civilization? The journey was long, and tensions grew among the crew. No one had the answers they needed. They could only follow the trail left by the signal. There were whispers among the crew members, rumors of what they might find: a race of invincible aliens, a forgotten war that destroyed everything in its path. But no one dared to say it out loud. No one wanted to voice their fears. Then, one day, as the Endurance approached the outer reaches of the system, the atmosphere shifted. The crew felt it. It was as if something was watching them. It was a chilling sensation, and it grew stronger with each passing moment. Dr. Pierce stood in the observation deck, staring out into the void of space, his thoughts racing. Could the signal have been a trap? Had they been led into the jaws of an enemy they didn't even understand? Suddenly, the calm was shattered by a loud alarm. The crew scrambled into action, rushing to their posts. On the main screen, an image appeared: a massive structure, floating in space. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. The technology was advanced, alien, and yet it was dying. The walls of the structure were cracked and broken, and there were signs of decay. The structure itself seemed to be on the brink of collapse, yet it still pulsed with energy. "What is that?" someone on the crew asked, their voice trembling with awe and fear. Dr. Pierce stepped forward, his heart pounding. "It's the source of the signal," he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "And it's not a place we should be entering lightly." As the ship neared the structure, the signal grew stronger. It was as if the structure itself was calling them. It was impossible to ignore, but no one knew what awaited them inside. The ship hovered near the entrance, and the crew prepared for what would come next. The doors of the alien structure slowly opened, revealing a dark, empty interior. The crew took their first steps inside, their footsteps echoing through the vast, hollow space. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of centuries. It felt as though they were walking into a tomb, a forgotten place where the dead still whispered in the silence. As they moved deeper into the structure, they began to uncover something horrifying. The walls were covered in strange symbols, alien writing that none of them could understand. There were signs of battle everywhere, destroyed weapons, shattered walls, and strange, twisted remains of what appeared to be alien bodies. Whatever had happened here, it was clear that the inhabitants of this place had fought a war to the death. And then they found it. In the heart of the structure, lying among the ruins, was a lone survivor. Its form was humanoid, but it was nothing like anything Earth had ever encountered. Its skin was pale, its eyes wide, and filled with terror. The creature looked at them with pleading eyes, as if it had been waiting for them, hoping that they could understand its pain. It was a being from another world, and it had a message for humanity, a warning, and perhaps a plea for help. As Dr. Pierce moved closer, the survivor reached out a trembling hand. It was clear now. The signal wasn't just a call for help. It was something much darker, something that would soon change the fate of humanity forever. The hidden enemy. The team gathered around the lone survivor, the alien's eyes pleading with a mixture of fear and desperation. It was clear that this creature had endured unimaginable suffering. Its frail form trembled as it gestured weakly toward a set of ancient alien symbols on the wall, symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. Dr. Pierce was the first to approach, his hand cautiously extended. "We need to understand it," he murmured to his team, though his voice carried an undertone of urgency. The alien's eyes shifted toward him, filled with an unspoken understanding that their time was running out. Slowly, the alien raised its hand and pointed toward a door at the far end of the chamber. The silence in the room grew heavier as the team moved forward. They had no choice but to follow, driven by the hope that the alien held the key to unraveling the mystery. As they stepped deeper into the forgotten structure, the sounds of their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. The strange energy that had once filled the place now seemed to shift, as if something was awakening. The alien led them to a room bathed in a dim, unnatural light. Inside, there were more walls covered in strange symbols. But this time, there was something different. The air felt thicker, charged with a dark presence. As they walked in, Dr. Pierce felt a chill run down his spine. The room was filled with holographic images, flickering like ghosts in the shadows. These images depicted a powerful civilization, a proud race that had once ruled the stars. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of, and yet there was a fatal flaw in their design. One of the holograms flickered to life, showing an image of a massive alien warship, a ship unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Its dark, menacing hull was covered in jagged spikes, and its weaponry looked terrifyingly advanced. The ship's name, written in the alien language, seemed to burn into their minds. The words were simple, yet horrifying. The Consumed. Dr. Pierce stepped forward, examining the display. This isn't just history. This is a warning." He turned to the alien, who was now slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, clearly exhausted from whatever force it had been holding back. "The Consumed," Dr. Pierce repeated. "Who are they? What happened to your people?" The alien's eyes widened with terror, and it weakly tapped the hologram. The images shifted, showing horrific scenes of destruction. Cities were wiped out in moments. Entire populations vanished, and in the center of it all stood an enemy, creatures of darkness, their forms shifting and contorting as they tore through planets with ruthless efficiency. The Consumed, as the alien called them, were not a simple army. They were an unstoppable force, a plague of annihilation that consumed everything in their path. "It's them," the alien whispered, its voice barely audible. "The Consumed. They do not forgive. They do not stop. Once they target a world, there is no escape." A cold realization settled over the crew. These weren't just ancient stories. This was a warning. And it was too late. The Consumed were already aware of humanity. Suddenly, the room trembled, the walls shaking violently as if the entire structure was coming to life. The alien fell silent, its eyes darting nervously as it clawed at the ground. "They are coming," it gasped. "You must leave. Now." But it was already too late. The ship's sensors began to beep frantically as an alarm sounded across the Endurance. Dr. Pierce turned to look at the monitors. The image on the screen was chilling. A massive fleet of warships, dark and hulking, was heading straight for them. They were far out of range, but they were coming. And they were coming fast. "Prepare for immediate departure," Dr. Pierce shouted, his voice laced with panic. "Get to the ship now." The team moved quickly, their hearts pounding as they scrambled toward the exit. The alien's warning echoed in their minds. Once they target a world, there is no escape. As they reached the hangar bay, the crew raced to get the Endurance into the air. Dr. Pierce's mind raced as he realized the full scope of the situation. The Consumed were not just a distant threat. They were a force that had already marked humanity. The signal had not been a cry for help, but a warning that the Consumed had arrived. The Endurance engines roared to life as the ship lifted off, escaping the alien structure. But as the crew watched the monitors, it was clear that their nightmare had only just begun. The fleet of the Consumed was not just a military force. It was a storm of destruction, and they had only one goal: to destroy everything in their path. Dr. Pierce's thoughts raced. They had seen the destruction of the alien world, the death of an entire civilization. And now, Earth was next. They had no allies, no chance of winning without more information. But they couldn't turn back. The Consumed had been awakened, and humanity's survival was now in question. As the Endurance shot off into space, the cold truth set in. Earth had just become a target in a galactic war of survival, and humanity had no idea how to fight back against an enemy that had never been defeated. The alien survivors' final words echoed in Dr. Pierce's mind. They do not stop. They do not forgive. The Consumed were coming, and they would not show mercy. The decision to fight back. As the Endurance raced away from the destroyed alien structure, the crew fell into a grim silence. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. The alien survivors' warning rang in their ears. The Consumed do not stop. They do not forgive. The alien fleet was on the move, and Earth was now in its sights. The next steps would determine humanity's fate, but the crew was still reeling from the shock of what they had just discovered. How could they fight an enemy that had wiped out entire civilizations without a second thought? Inside the Endurance, Dr. Pierce and the mission commanders gathered in the ship's briefing room. The room was filled with tension. Everyone could sense it, the weight of the decision that lay ahead. In just a matter of hours, the enemy fleet would be within striking distance of Earth. There was no time to waste. "We have no idea what we're up against," Dr. Pierce began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "But we can't just run. The Consumed are relentless. If they reach Earth, they will destroy everything. We have to fight back." Commander Kate Anders, the lead military strategist, stood up, her face tight with concern. "And how do we fight them? We've never faced anything like this before. Their technology is far beyond ours. We've seen their warships. They have the power to wipe us off the map in an instant. How can we possibly stand a chance?" The room fell into silence. It was a question no one had an answer to. The consumed had proven themselves to be an unstoppable force. Their sheer power and ruthlessness were unmatched. But Dr. Pierce refused to give up hope. He knew they had to find a way. If humanity was to survive, they couldn't afford to be passive. They had to take the fight to the enemy. "We may be outmatched," Dr. Pierce said, his voice hardening with resolve. "But we have something they don't. Determination. We have the will to fight, and we have our minds. They destroyed an entire civilization, but we're still here. We've survived." Commander Anders glanced at the screen, where a map of Earth's defense systems flickered in the dim light. "And we'll need every bit of that will," she muttered. "We're going to have to throw everything we have at them, or we won't have a chance." It was then that Dr. Pierce's eyes landed on a strange piece of data on the screen. It was a potential lead that hadn't been explored yet, a possible weakness in the consumed technology, hidden deep within their warships. The data had come from the alien structure they had just left. The alien species that once inhabited the system had left behind fragments of their technology, advanced but damaged. And among those fragments, there was something that caught Dr. Pierce's attention. "It's a long shot," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But there's something in their technology that could work to our advantage. We just need to figure out how to use it." The room was filled with uncertainty, but there was also a spark of hope. If they could unlock the secrets of the consumed technology, they might stand a chance. But the question remained, could they do it in time? A plan began to form. The Endurance would make its way back to the site of the destroyed alien structure, hoping to retrieve more data. The crew would need to scavenge whatever they could to uncover the weakness that Dr. Pierce had discovered. But it wouldn't be easy. The enemy fleet was closing in, and they couldn't afford to waste any time. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the next phase of the mission, Dr. Pierce and Commander Anders exchanged a look. There was no turning back now. They had made their decision. The time for hiding was over. They had to strike first, or humanity would fall. The Endurance altered course, heading back toward the alien system. As they traveled, Dr. Pierce couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The consumed were coming, and they weren't going to stop until Earth was destroyed. But humanity had one advantage: its capacity for resilience, the will to survive. And as long as they had that, they had a chance. Hours later, the Endurance arrived at the alien system. The crew quickly deployed a team to gather the remaining fragments of the technology left behind by the alien species. It was dangerous, but it was their only hope. As they worked, the urgency of the situation mounted. The enemy fleet was now just days away from Earth, and the clock was ticking. Back on the ship, Dr. Pierce and the team worked tirelessly, piecing together the information they had uncovered. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them hope. A weakness had been discovered in the consumed's energy core, a critical vulnerability in their warship's power grid. If they could exploit this weakness, they could cripple the fleet. But even as they prepared to launch a full-scale assault, Dr. Pierce knew that they were running out of time. The enemy was nearly here, and their weapons were far superior. They had to act now, or humanity would be wiped out before they had a chance to fight back. The final decision had been made. Earth would stand and fight. There would be no surrender, no retreat. The fight for humanity's survival was just beginning, and they would unleash every ounce of their fury to ensure that the consumed would learn the hard way that humanity could not be defeated. The training begins. Time was slipping through their fingers, and there was no room for hesitation. The enemy fleet was nearing Earth, and with each passing moment, the threat grew more real. Humanity's only hope lay in the hands of a select few, those who would lead the charge against the consumed. They weren't military elite, nor did they possess centuries of combat experience. What they had was heart, a determination to fight for the future of their world, no matter the odds. As the Endurance moved further into the depths of the alien system, humanity's brightest minds worked nonstop to decode the newly uncovered weaknesses in the Consume's technology. But there was one more crucial element to survival: the soldiers who would face these enemies on the front lines. Training was needed, and fast. Commander Kate Anders oversaw the selection of personnel for the task force. Her job was to take ordinary humans, train them, and turn them into warriors capable of fighting an almost unstoppable enemy. It wasn't just about learning to fight. It was about mastering the will to survive. She gathered the first group of recruits in a large training facility aboard the Endurance. Their faces were a mix of determination and fear, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Most were civilians, volunteers who had once been doctors, engineers, or teachers, now standing ready to defend their planet. "We don't have the luxury of time," Commander Anders told them, her voice firm. "You've been chosen for a reason. You may not be soldiers, but you are now the last line of defense for humanity. The Consumed will not show mercy. They will destroy everything in their path unless we stop them. We fight, or we die. There is no other choice." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "We will make you ready to fight, but you will need to trust in your training and in each other. You'll learn more than how to use a weapon. You'll learn how to be part of something greater, something worth fighting for." And so, the training began. For the next several days, the recruits were put through rigorous physical and mental tests. They learned combat techniques, weapons handling, and strategy. But there was more to it than that. The task force had to be prepared for the unknown, for the kind of war that humanity had never faced before. The Consumed didn't just fight with advanced technology. They fought with a ferocity, a relentless need to destroy that made them terrifying opponents. Dr. Pierce, though more of a scientist than a soldier, also played his part. He worked closely with the recruits, teaching them about the enemy they would soon face. He showed them the data they had uncovered about the Consumed, their strength, their strategies, their ruthless nature. He spoke of the alien technology they had discovered, explaining how it could be used against the enemy. "Knowledge is your best weapon," Dr. Pierce explained during one of the briefings. "The Consumed are not just a force of destruction. They're a force of chaos. But we have something they don't. We understand their weaknesses, and we will use that knowledge to fight back." As the recruits trained, something remarkable began to happen. They started to transform. The fear that had once been so palpable faded, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. They weren't just learning how to fight. They were learning how to fight for the survival of the human race. And every lesson, every exercise, every battle drill made them stronger, more unified. One of the recruits, a former teacher named Olivia, had been struggling at first. She was slow to pick up the combat skills, and the physical demands of the training were grueling. But day by day, she pushed herself harder. The other recruits supported her, and Commander Anders saw her determination. One morning, after a particularly intense drill, Olivia stood tall, her face set with fierce resolve. "I'm not going to let our world fall," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've taught children for years, but now I'm going to protect them. I'm going to fight for them." The same fire burned in the hearts of every recruit. They were no longer just civilians. They were humanity's last hope. In the midst of their training, word came that the Consumed fleet had entered Earth's orbit. They were here. The time for preparation was over. Commander Anders knew that the recruits were ready, but they had one final test. It was a test of everything they had learned, everything they had become. They would face the enemy in a simulated environment, the virtual battleground designed to mimic the real thing. It wasn't the same as actual combat, but it was the closest they could get. The simulation began. The recruits were deployed in teams, each tasked with eliminating a simulated enemy fleet. The stakes felt real, and the pressure was palpable. As the battle unfolded, it became clear that the task force had learned more than just combat skills. They had learned to think as a unit, to rely on each other, to adapt in the face of danger. Commander Anders watched from the control room, her heart racing, as the teams moved through the simulation. It was intense, the kind of fight humanity had never seen before. But with every passing minute, she saw the recruits grow stronger, more confident. They had learned to anticipate the enemy's moves, to counter their attacks, to exploit their weaknesses. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the simulation ended. The recruits had won. The enemy fleet had been destroyed. There was no cheering, no celebration, just a silent recognition of what they had accomplished. They were ready, but Commander Anders knew that the real fight had just begun. As the recruits stood together, staring out at the stars beyond the Endurance's observation deck, the reality of their situation hit home. The consumed were not waiting. The time for action was now. Humanity had trained, had learned, had prepared. Now they would face the greatest battle in history. Would they win? Would they survive? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Humanity's wrath had been awakened, and they would fight with everything they had. The first clash. The moment had arrived. After days of rigorous training, months of preparation, and the constant pressure of time ticking away, the first battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The consumed fleet had reached Earth's orbit. They had arrived, and the fight for the future of humanity was now inevitable. Commander Kate Anders stood on the bridge of the Endurance, her eyes fixed on the view screen, which displayed the looming threat ahead. The massive warships of the consumed were far from subtle, their dark, jagged forms a terrifying sight. The sheer size of their fleet dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. There were hundreds of these monstrous ships, each one a weapon of unimaginable power. Dr. Pierce stood nearby, analyzing data as it streamed across his console. The weakness they had uncovered in the consumed's power cores was their only hope, but they had to act quickly. They had no idea how the consumed would respond to an attack, and every second wasted was a second closer to Earth's destruction. "Prepare for battle," Commander Anders ordered, her voice calm but laced with the weight of what was about to happen. "This is what we've trained for. Trust in your training. We've got one shot at this." The Endurance was accompanied by a small fleet of Earth's best warships, designed for speed and firepower, but they were nothing compared to the overwhelming might of the consumed. The humanity's forces were outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed. Still, they would fight with everything they had. As the ships moved into position, a message came through, breaking the silence. An encrypted communication from Earth's High Command. It was brief and to the point. Engage at will. Protect Earth at all costs. The crew of the Endurance exchanged grim nods. There was no turning back now. "We can do this," Olivia, the former teacher-turned-soldier, said as she readied her weapons. Her voice was steady, filled with resolve. The rest of the team, standing in the training room ready for action, nodded in agreement. They had trained for this moment, and now it was real. The first wave of battle began with an explosion of light as the Endurance fired its weapons. The smaller Earth ships opened fire, launching missiles and energy blasts at the oncoming fleet of consumed warships. But the enemy was swift. Their ships retaliated almost instantly, firing back with devastating force. The Endurance rocked violently from the blast, but the ship held steady. "We've got their attention," Commander Anders shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "All ships, stay in formation. Engage them with everything you've got." The Endurance and the other Earth ships closed in on the enemy, engaging in a deadly dance of destruction. Missiles flew, energy beams cut through the darkness of space, and explosions filled the view screen. The enemy fleet was relentless, firing back with precision and deadly power. But humanity's forces refused to back down. Each strike, each hit, was an act of defiance. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of every person back home on Earth. As the battle raged on, it became clear that humanity was outmatched. The enemy ships seemed impervious to most of Earth's weapons. The consumed ships took hit after hit, but they kept coming. Every missile launched by humanity felt like it barely made a dent. But the humans weren't giving up. They were using their knowledge of the enemy's weaknesses, thanks to the alien technology they had uncovered, to target the consumed fleet's power cores. Dr. Pierce was at his console, his fingers flying across the keys as he directed the ship's fire. "Target their engines. We need to disable them," he shouted. The Endurance's weapons locked onto the power cores of the nearest consumed ship, firing with everything they had. The energy blast hit its mark, and the consumed ship's power grid sparked violently. It was a small victory, but it was enough to send a message to the enemy. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. But the consumed fleet was vast. No matter how many ships they took down, more seemed to take their place. For every ship the humans destroyed, it felt like two more appeared in their place, ready to continue the assault. The sheer scale of the enemy's force was overwhelming. Then came the worst moment of the battle. The Endurance was hit hard. A massive energy blast from a consumed warship slammed into the side of the ship, causing systems to fail and alarms to blare. The crew was thrown from their seats as the ship rocked violently. The view screen went dark for a moment, the crew holding their breath, unsure if they had just lost their most powerful weapon. "Report," Commander Anders shouted. The systems flickered back online, and Dr. Pierce's voice came through, strained but clear. "We've taken a hit to the starboard side. Shields are down to 40%. We're still operational, but we need to move quickly. We can't take another hit like that." Olivia, who had been on the battlefield, now stood with her team. They had fought through the chaos and destruction. It was their first real test, and although they had scored some hits on the enemy, it was far from enough. But they had learned something valuable. Their enemy was not invincible. There was still a chance to win. As the Endurance pulled away from the immediate danger zone, Commander Anders gave her orders. "We need to regroup, strategize, and hit them with everything we've got. The enemy is powerful, but we're not out of this yet." The first clash had been brutal. It had shown humanity just how powerful the consumed were and how much Earth's forces still had to learn. But it also showed humanity's strength, its refusal to yield. The battle was far from over, and for the first time, the consumed might have realized they weren't facing an easy victory. The war for Earth had begun, and humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. It was fighting to prove that no force, no matter how vast or terrifying, could crush their spirit. The enemy had tasted their wrath, but it was only the beginning. Humanity was ready for what came next. Vengeance unleashed. The battle had begun, but humanity's war was far from over. The first clash with the consumed had revealed the true scale of the threat. Their ships were powerful, nearly unstoppable, and their forces seemed endless. But the humans had made one thing clear: the fight for Earth would not be one-sided. They had shown their enemy that they were willing to die, if necessary, to protect their world. The Endurance had barely survived its first engagement, and the damage to Earth's forces was mounting. The smaller human warships were struggling to hold their own against the massive, intimidating fleet of the consumed. But they weren't backing down. The battle had awoken something in humanity, a ferocity, a determination that the consumed hadn't anticipated. As the days went by, humanity's forces regrouped. Earth's military leaders, the scientists, and the soldiers all knew one thing now. If they were going to survive, they had to destroy the consumed fleet before it reached Earth's surface. It was no longer about defending. It was about taking the fight to the enemy, about unleashing humanity's vengeance on the invaders who thought they could crush them. Dr. Pierce and Commander Anders, now working together more closely than ever, pored over the data they had gathered during the first battle. They had learned more about the consumed's tactics and weaknesses. It was clear that their power core technology could be exploited, but to make a decisive strike, they needed more resources and a bolder strategy. Earth's forces could not rely on mere defense anymore. They had to go on the offensive. And so, they launched Operation Wrath. The plan was risky, but it was their only option. The Endurance, now fully repaired and ready for action, was joined by the remaining Earth warships. This time, the mission would be different. Instead of waiting for the Consumed to come to them, humanity's fleet would attack the Consumed head-on, striking at their most vulnerable points, namely, their fleet's power grid and weapon systems. It would be an all-out assault. Today, we take the fight to them, Commander Anders said, addressing the fleet over comms. Her voice rang with conviction. We will strike, and we will strike hard. Every ship, every soldier, every resource we have is going into this. This is not just a battle. This is our vengeance. We will not be erased. As the ships moved toward the enemy fleet, a strange sense of unity settled over the crew. They weren't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting to show the Consumed that Earth was not a planet to be wiped out. This was a home, filled with the will to live and the drive to fight back. Humanity's wrath had been awakened, and there would be no mercy for the invaders. The battle began with an explosion of fire and light as the human fleet engaged the Consumed. The warships of Earth targeted the enemy's weak points, engines, weapon arrays, and power cores, ruthlessly hitting their marks. The Consumed responded with brutal efficiency, their ships firing back with deadly accuracy. But this time, humanity was prepared. They had learned, adapted, and come together to launch an attack with unprecedented coordination. As the Endurance led the charge, Commander Anders and Dr. Pierce worked in tandem to direct the fleet. The crew of the Endurance had become a cohesive unit, each person playing their part in this fight for survival. The soldiers in the field were relentless, attacking the enemy's ships with everything they had. The skies above Earth, once peaceful, were now filled with the sounds of war as humanity made its stand. But the Consumed were not easily beaten. Their ships fought with the power of a force that had conquered entire galaxies. For every ship humanity destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, and yet humanity pushed on, refusing to falter. Then, in the heart of the battle, something remarkable happened. The first major victory for humanity came when the Endurance managed to breach the power core of a massive Consumed flagship. The ship's core collapsed in a chain reaction, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might be turning. The victory was hard-won, but it was enough to send a message. The Consumed weren't invincible. Humanity had a chance, and that chance, no matter how small, was worth fighting for. But the Consumed weren't done yet. Their fleet regrouped, launching a final devastating assault on Earth's forces. The battle reached its peak as the remaining Earth warships engaged in a desperate, last-ditch effort to protect the planet. Explosions shook the atmosphere, and debris from destroyed ships littered the void of space. Dr. Pierce, watching from the bridge of the Endurance, knew that this final moment would determine the fate of humanity. He turned to Commander Anders. "We got one more shot. If we can take down their flagship, we might be able to cripple the entire fleet." Anders nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "We'll do it. This ends now." With a fierce roar, the Endurance and the remaining Earth ships charged toward the Consumed flagship. The battle that followed was like nothing humanity had ever seen. Every resource was thrown into this final assault. Humanity's finest weapons were unleashed. The Consumed flagship stood tall, its weapons discharging deadly beams that nearly tore the Endurance apart. But the human fleet pressed on, their resolve stronger than ever. In a last-ditch effort, Dr. Pierce used the information they had uncovered about the Consumed's power cores. The team's precision fire hit the flagship's core, sending the enemy ship into a catastrophic meltdown. The flagship exploded in a flash of light, and the shockwave rippled through the enemy fleet. One by one, Consumed ships began to fall, their power sources failing in the wake of the destruction. The final blow was struck. As the last remnants of the consumed fleet were destroyed, silence fell over the battlefield. Earth had won. The consumed had been defeated, their fleet shattered, their power broken. Humanity had unleashed its vengeance. Earth had not been erased. The invaders had tasted humanity's wrath, and it had been enough to stop them. In the aftermath of the battle, the crew of the Endurance stood together, exhausted but triumphant. They had done it. Against all odds, they had saved their world. But even as they celebrated, they knew the universe was vast, and they had only just begun to understand the forces that inhabited it. The consumed were gone, but the galaxy was full of unknowns, and humanity's journey was far from over. For now, however, Earth was safe, and humanity had proven to the stars that when pushed to the brink, they would rise. They would never back down.